Welcome to Squirrel, the podcast for distracted writers, hosted by Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner. Hey everybody, welcome to the Squirrel Podcast. This is Jody.
This is Candy.
And it's April Fool's Day. I hope that you haven't been pranked yet. But the day is young.
Do you do pranks on April Fool's Day?
There was a time I did. I haven't for a while because I'm the one that would have to clean them up, and I'm just not into that.
I've never been into pranks. I've never been to April Fool's Day. I don't
But I used to prank my brother. We would do things to each other quite often. And it didn't have to be April Fool's Day either. So some of life's funniest moments circle around efforts to trick another person. Like America's Funniest Videos or Candid Camera. There were these shows, and I just dated myself there quite a bit. America's Funniest Videos is still running.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Punk'd.
Like
with
Punk'd,
Ashton. Yeah. Sure.
So there's this whole realm of humor that is circling around pranks. And we're going to talk a little bit about pranks today, but we're mostly going to talk about injecting humor into your fiction and different ways you can do that. And the reason we don't see a lot of humor in fiction is it's actually quite challenging to write some sort of literal joke, like literary joke. Like, it's hard to write humor. So kicking off April, we thought this is the perfect time to talk about pranks, mishaps, and humor in fiction. So my first question is, what are your first thoughts when thinking about, pranks and humor in fiction? Like, where do I go with that?
Well, this is interesting because first on pranks, they make me uncomfortable. But that's just, I think I won't be talking much about pranks, I'm sure, but humor, I am a humorous writer. I like to put humor into all of my fiction. So it's...
What are your general impressions of just humor in fiction?
That's what I want to read. That is what I want to read. I don't want to read anything else. I don't like literary fiction. I don't find it funny. I found it depressing.
It is depressing.
So I won't read that. I love to read anything with humor. If you make me laugh out loud, it's a winner. I love laughing out loud. And I look at myself as a funny writer. Try to add humor to all of my stuff. So I find it completely opposite from what you were saying, that you find it hard to add humor to your fiction, where I think that it's hard for me to be serious.
That's fair.
Yeah, how about you?
So my first thoughts when thinking about, something like humorous fiction or pranks that happen in stories, I always think of these middle grade novels where these kids are always doing these kind of goofy off the wall things. And a lot of it is to be funny, to be read. Like, to make the story lighthearted and silly, even though the kids might be going through serious things. There's always this amount of humor injected in there, so it's more palatable for kids. But I do really appreciate that kind of humor and silliness in those stories. So my first thoughts when it comes to, humor in fiction, that's for kids. But it's not, like you were saying.
Oh, wow, no.
Like any book can have... I think any book can benefit from strategic placement of humor.
No, and you mentioned mischief, which is something you haven't mentioned here, but I wanted to bring up that you added it to our notes. Mischief, I feel, is different than pranks, because mischief, when it comes to the Fae, I think a lot of what they do is mischief.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not so much pranks, it's we hate humans. We want to do this or do that to, I'm going to screw with you.
Inconvenience.
Yeah.
We shall only steal your left shoe.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to mention that. I think that that's a way to bring in humor or pranks into your fiction as well.
So when it comes to storytelling, do you feel like, I think it's a no-brainer, humor and mischief does enhance storytelling. Like, I think it makes it better. But in what ways does it make it better? I think I'll start on this one. So I think, and I tend to write serious, more serious than Candy does. But I think humor provides a balance between serious moments and light moments. Only because if your book stays serious the whole time, you don't feel that it's serious anymore. It's just a drag.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not gravitas and importance. It's just, you're being mired through serious the whole time. But if it's interjected with these light moments or a little bit of silliness or sarcasm or something, I think you get that emotional roller coaster up and down where when you go back into serious, the serious feels serious again.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. There needs to be a tension breaker. Just like when Arnold will say these one-liners in a intense, action sequence. And then you have this, something to let the audience breathe a little bit.
Arnold.
Schwarzenegger.
Not the cartoon. Got it. Check it.
I don't know anything about Arnold, the cartoon. Like, zero. Is it funny? I don't even know if Arnold's funny. But that's what I mean, is just you need to let the audience breathe a bit, because they are holding their breath during these intense moments. And by breaking up the tension there, it can make it not feel so serious. So you're totally right. I think that if you bring in humor I think it's character building, because either your character needs to, let's just look at Han Solo. There's like something specific about his character that makes him funny. He's like, this bounty hunter, but that he's just very cavalier and he's very snarky. He has these things that are really funny and off balance, but that doesn't mean that so it gives him a specific kind of character trait, So I also think it's fun. I love humorous conversations. That's where a lot of my humor comes in, actually, is with these conversations that my characters have with each other. That's where I can be the funniest, because I know more about the timing of when it comes to talking with people and when to bring in that joke and when to be funny or articulate or whatever. That's what I think. It's good. It's a good character builder.
So what are examples of a story with, like, maybe a prank gone awry or a bit of humor used to lighten a situation or some other mischief, and how it made the story better?
This was hard for me to think of, but I thought immediately of Good Omens. Now, because the babies get switched. So it's like Crowley's and Aziraphale's like job to watch the Antichrist, right? To make sure that he doesn't do anything wrong, and they're watching the wrong baby. And we as the audience know this, but they don't. And it's hilarious.
It is
seeing them go, this kid, he's like a brat, this 10-year-old kid. But they're like, well, I can't really see him being the Antichrist. Where, back in England, that's where the Antichrist is. And that's where they, he's growing up in this family. Oh my gosh.
The whole thing is and Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, they're the master of this kind of low-key humor where it's just funny, like the Satanic Order of Nuns.
Yeah.
Like, it's awesome.
Yep. Oh, I can think of some other things going back to the Fae in Spiderwick Chronicles. The Thimbletack, I think he's the little fairy guy that is in the house doing all these pranks, making them want to leave the house. So I can think of that. And I think Toland's do you know Toland's? It's so funny. Toland's Explosive Tales for Children. That's what it is. Well, I'll put the links in the blog. Because it was just really funny about how these little creatures, they're like little trolls, kind of ruin children's lives. It's just really funny. Anyway, but what about you? What do you think? What can you think?
My first thoughts went to Princess Bride. So if you think of Princess Bride, this is a story of a kidnapping and a planned murder attempt. There's not a lot of funny in that sentence, but the whole show is hilarious. Yeah. It is so funny. And one of the scenes that will always tickle me is like they're on top of the cliff and you've got Dread Pirate Roberts and you've got Buttercup and they're fighting and she's like, I will never, like, you killed Wesley. And she shoves him and he falls down this hill and he yells, as you wish. I mean, we all know this scene, like, and she's like, oh no, like in that moment, it's like, oh no, you just killed the person that you have loved forever. Yeah. And it could have been really dark. And what is her choice? She could just sit there and lament, oh no, he's gone, he's dead. No, she throws herself down the hill after him. Like, that is the funniest choice you can do. Yeah. And I just, like of all the ways to handle that situation, they chose one that ended up being like, and if we're going with visual storytelling, I mean, watching them tumble down the hill in the movie is weirdly delightful.
Yeah, it is. It's true. I know exactly when Wesley's like mask falls off, you know?
Yeah.
I've seen that show so many times. Have you read the book?
Mhm.
Yeah, the book has the same, it's like nearly the same, exactly the same.
So tips. We need to give tips because this is a writing podcast helping people write better.
Do you have any?
I probably do. Hang on. I think humor is in the timing.
Yes.
Like almost the heart of all humor really depends on the timing of when it happens. Because if you try to be funny all the time, it's not going to land and it's going to get annoying really fast. But if you find these perfect little moments where it's like things have gotten dark or like something got very serious for a moment and then all of a sudden somebody says something snarky or like somebody bursts in the room and has no idea what's going on and they're tonally inappropriate for the situation and it's just it comes across as funny. You know, it's like having a clown march into a murder scene and doesn't know that they have and they're trying to do their shtick and everyone's like, stop, just no, really, stop.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny. It's situational humor. I think there's a lot of opportunities to have that where it can work really well.
Agreed. I think that if you're going to do a prank or some kind of mischief, it needs to be a plot device. I just wanted to add that it needs to be something essential to your plot as it's going or your characters, and maybe a plot point where it's changing the story specifically. Like you just mentioned with the clown coming into the party, that specific moment that may change the story direction completely.
Yeah, and that's where I agree with you. Pranks would have to be something planned, whereas humor can be anywhere. And mischief, I think, is just embroiled into certain characters.
Yes.
They just tend to do things that are mischievous. Embroiled and baked. They are baked in.
Do you have any examples?
Like in my own writing or in the world as it is?
Sure. No, in your own writing.
Okay, so originally when I'm going to be an epic fantasy writer and I'm going to have all of this serious, crazy, cool stuff happen. Like I thought the idea of being a serious writer writing serious things meant that humor wasn't part of it. Which was dumb because I read it all the time and there's humor in all of that. But my brain wasn't registering it as, oh, this is actually a funny moment. Like I was seeing it going, funnier and more serious. But like I wasn't registering that was actually the writer injecting humor into the work intentionally. And so the more I've studied and the more I've learned about how necessary it is to have these lighter moments and sillier moments and snarky moments, and the more I've read books that have nailed these moments, and Terry Pratchett, I'm looking at you, like the more it's become this terrific fun to inject humor here and there. And I love really dry humor and like low-key sarcasm. So
Blackadder type.
Oh, it's very like I was raised on British humor. And so that's where I tend to go, is this kind of just very understated, subtle humor that you might miss. But if you catch it, it's like, oh, I think it's brilliant, but I can't say that about my own work.
I love that. I think of myself as a humorous writer. So not a fantasy writer. I write comedy. And once upon a time, I wanted to be a comedian. This is where we are so different, because I wanted to be a comedian up until the moment I realized that comedians write their own jokes.
Wow.
I know that's so dumb, but I thought that they were spontaneous, that this wit came just, was part of them and they just would say these things. Then I realized they wrote their jokes and that they sometimes, I've met comedians, sometimes they're not very funny when you talk to them, but they have really great timing. There's an act to it. It's facial expressions, it's body language. It's just all of these different elements that are kind of put together in order to make the joke land. And when I think of writing, that's honestly where also another thing that needs to be brought up. What are the actions? What is the body language? It doesn't necessarily need to be obvious. It can be this subtle change, but you got to make sure when you're writing funny that the joke lands. that it hits the mark where it needs to, or you're going to fail as a humorous writer, and people think you're contrived, or that you're, just, I don't know. So anyway, prepare the joke for the landing. Make sure that the audience gets it.
I think a test reader would be ideal for stuff like that. Because when you think something's hilarious and then you pass it off to someone else, they're like, I don't get it. Worst feeling ever.
Well, it's just like comedians will try jokes that they think are funny, and then when they put them in front of a live audience and they don't land, then they have to revamp and rethink. So yeah, there's an audience that needs to be receptive to it for sure. All right.
So summing up, just like anything in writing, if this is something that you haven't tried in your own work and you're like, oh, this feels awkward. This feels like I don't know if I want to do it. Give it a try. The first time you do anything is always awkward, but this is something that you can study from people you really like reading, see how they interject humor, and see if you can find ways to inject humor into your own work, because you might be surprised just how much you find when you start looking for it. And how much easier it is to put it in your own work when you start seeing it in other work.
Yeah.
So seek and destroy.
I think if you want to, on the same lines, if you want to write funny, you need to read funny. I like Delia and Nora Ephron for this reason, just because they have a very funny take on just life in general. There's a lot of, even though both of them have very deep stories, I think Nora had cancer and she wrote their book before she passed away. I mean, there's lots of heart to it, and not just it being funny and enjoyable to read, but there's a lot of emotional charm to humor as well. So I want to say, I'm always caveating everything that I have to say. Don't embarrass your audience. I think
that's fair.
I don't like it. The reason why I don't like pranks is I don't like to be embarrassed. I don't like to embarrass other people. So I think that is the same thing that when it comes to writing, just be aware of your audience and how they're going to receive it. And if they get this reflective embarrassment, maybe you're doing something wrong. So anyway, there you go. That's my last thoughts on humor. So this is an interesting topic because I never considered it part of my writing. It was just always there. It's not something that I sought out to write more funny. I was already writing funny.
You are funny.
I always try to be the funniest in the room. Just be aware of that. It's not always happens, but I always try. Okay, anyway, all right. What do we have coming up next? I think it's my episode. Oh, yes. Okay, so welcome to April, and April is National Poetry Month. And I know Jody's so excited about this because I know that she loves poetry so much. So we are just going to talk about National Poetry Month and get out all of our feelings about it.
I hope you're sensing the humor in that statement.
You see, Jody's face right now is how it goes green. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
I'm dying inside. Anyway, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked anything you heard, we do have a Patreon and a Buy Us a Coffee. Yes, we're going to bring this up every episode.
And just share us, because I think that's,
Actually, yeah.
Something
I would
so,
like you to share.
Yeah, please share. Tell your friends about this and keep us going. Thank you, guys.
All right, this has been fun.
Thank you for listening to the Squirrel Podcast for the Distracted Writer with Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner. Please like and subscribe to our podcast for updates and new episodes, and find more information at our website, squirrelpodcast.com. Stay distracted, everyone. Do we go on tangents?
We're squirrel. We always go on tangents. That's kind of our thing.